might have heard this in the news, on television, in school, plastered on a billboard somewhere, or maybe you have heard the variation climate crisis. This was, after all, dubbed the Oxford 2019 Word of the Year. So what is climate change? To begin to answer some of these questions around climate change, let's first define climate and unravel the differences between climate and weather. When we think of weather, we are talking on timescales from minutes to months, so when you notice it's raining outside, that would be an example of weather. Same with if you noticed it was really hot outside that day, or maybe it was cold and rainy. When we think of climate, we are talking on a time scale of years. Think of climate as a cumulative average of long-term weather patterns. So we are talking about the average weather we would expect in that location. Like where I live in Massachusetts. An example of climate would be how we would expect it to snow here in the northeastern U.S. in January. To summarize, climate is what you expect and weather is what you get. Now that we've differentiated between weather and climate, it's time to answer the questions: what is climate change? And is climate change natural or humanly caused? So what is climate change? Climate change refers to changes over time in our climate system, or changes to our average weather. While changes to weather can happen in a matter of seconds, changes to climate happen on a time scale of hundreds of years. Scientists are in agreement that time scale is being sped up by humans as we pump stored carbon from natural resources like coal or fossil fuels and release a heat-trapping gas known as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Carbon dioxide is pumped out into the atmosphere. It acts like a blanket around the Earth, trapping heat and causing an increase in the overall temperature of the Earth. So why is this bad? Greenhouse gases are not inherently bad or harmful. They are actually the reason that the Earth is habitable. But let's go back to that blanket analogy. A blanket on a cold day is nice, but a heavy blanket on a hot day is uncomfortable and possibly deadly. CO2 being pumped into the atmosphere is making this blanket heavier and heavier, making the Earth more and more uncomfortable as it overheats. In scientific terms, the overall carbon dioxide being released into the atmosphere by humans is causing an increase in global temperatures and so much more. So where's the evidence? Many scientists look towards Dr. Charles David Keeling's work from Mauna Loa Observatory, the famous Keeling curve shown in the graph on the slide. This graph is the result from one of the longest ongoing measurements of atmospheric CO2 accumulation, and measurements continue today. It's one of the strongest pieces of evidence scientists have for connecting CO2 emissions, that heat-trapping gas, to climate change. We defined timescales for and talked about the differences between weather and climate. We looked at why climate change happens and examined the Keeling curve to understand how humans are contributing to climate change. The last thing to do is to discuss what can we do. Keep the environment in mind in everything that you do. Is what you're doing contributing to that blanket? If it's not you, what companies and businesses are contributing to this rapid CO2 increase witnessed at Mauna Loa, and how can we come together and hold them